I never expected grief to feel like an office waiting room, but there I was, standing under fluorescent lights, in the lobby of the real estate firm my dad built, staring at the glossy sign that still bore his name. When my dad passed away, he left behind the real estate company he ran. When I got to the office, I exhale, but the silence presses in. I hadn't spoken those words out loud until now. It was supposed to be easy, be sad, pick up paperwork, sort through memories. But that lobby? It was more than a room. It felt like a crucible, the past and present colliding. Dad started this company 30 years ago, when he was barely out of college and barely on his feet. He walked into that office with a briefcase and a dream, and built it on handshake deals, midnight coffee, and a stubborn refusal to quit, even after the '08 crash wiped half his savings. He called it Evergreen Realty. He said it was about roots, about something that lasts. I grew up under that mantra, summer afternoons trailing behind him to property viewings, fall evenings hearing stories from elderly clients. Your father is a man of his word. Winter mornings, lugging his coffee across the parking lot because he always ran late during tax season. He never missed birthdays or my games, even when he was closing deals in another state. When he called last month, breathless, voice trembling, I knew something was wrong before he said it. It was cancer. I walked through those lobby doors a week after his funeral. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and fresh carpet. I froze. On one side, the receptionist, Linda, smiled and nodded. She'd worked there since I was in high school, older now, of course. Her hair pulled into a bun, like Dad used to remind her about. "Look like the boss," he'd say. "You're home," she said softly when our eyes met. But I didn't feel at home. He left it all to me, every asset, every liability, every deal in progress. And that was the moment the walls closed in, because I didn't know real estate. I barely knew spreadsheets. Dad never let me near that side of the business. He said, "When you're ready," but I didn't think he'd mean now. I climbed the steps to his old office. The door was closed. A brass nameplate, John Elliott, founder and CEO, still glowed in the half-light. I knocked. "Come in," his assistant said. I pushed the door, heart pounding. Inside, the desk was stacked. Contracts, blueprints, coffee stains burned in the wood. I touched the edge of his favorite photo. Him, me, Mom, all smiling on a beach trip. I nearly dropped it. I nearly cried. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. All the faces I'd known since childhood, agents, admin staff, the junior broker Dad had mentored, stood watching. They didn't applaud. They didn't offer sympathy. They waited. And the question unspoken, "Sarah, everyone loved your dad. We're here for you. But we've got deals, deadlines, payments. We need a plan." My chest tightened. I tried to smile. "Give me a minute." I closed the door. I stood there, staring at his desk, his papers, his coffee mug. I was living his life. Inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility I hadn't asked for. My fingers brushed the phone. I thought, what if I just left? What if I walked away and said, "This isn't mine"? But I saw his handwriting on a napkin. "Don't sell your roots." And I thought, okay, I'll try. I opened the door. "Let's schedule a full review. I'll sit in on every meeting. I'll learn. And we'll do what Dad always did. One step at a time. No thunderous applause, but nods. And for the first time, hope flickered. That afternoon, I sat across the table from the firm's biggest client, mid-renovation apartment complex. The CEO, familiar, imposing, looked at me. "Your father trusted me," he said. "Trust me," he replied. His face softened. I left the office in the dark, rain falling. On the drive home, I thought about my father's funeral, the way he'd smiled, even in pain, the way people spoke of him like he was bigger than himself, and I realized I want to honor that story, but I have to write my own. The next few weeks were brutal. I buried myself in files, legal contracts, zoning disputes, rent rolls, financing structures. I was drowning in a language I didn't speak. My father had made this look effortless. I now knew it was anything but, and every hallway I walked down felt like it whispered behind my back. Can she really handle it? She's not him. She's just the daughter. I smiled, nodded, took notes in every meeting, but inside, I was cracking. And the worst part? They were right. I wasn't him. It started with the Lakehurst project, a 30-unit build-out on a stretch of land Dad had been fighting to keep from rezoning. It was the firm's crown jewel, the one thing that could stabilize our bottom line for the next 2 years. And suddenly, it was falling apart. Permits delayed, contractors walking off, an investor backing out without warning. Frank, that longtime broker, kept telling me, "Don't worry, Your dad had it under control, but the more I looked, the more things didn't line up. Invoices weren't matching the work, emails had gaps, and then I found a transfer, $75,000 wired from our development account to something called Pinegate Ventures, which we didn't own, and no one had mentioned. I walked into Frank's office the next morning. He looked up over his glasses. Calm, too calm. "Got a minute?" I asked. He nodded. I closed. That's when it hit me. He thought I wouldn't dig further. He thought I'd be afraid to ask more. He didn't know I already had. I went home that night and combed through everything. Found Pinegate Ventures registered under a holding company. Found that holding company tied to Frank. The same Frank who'd been mentoring my father in his final months. The same Frank who insisted I stay out of meetings that would just confuse you. I stared at the screen, breath stuck in my throat. He was bleeding the company dry and hiding it behind my father's name. The next morning, I called the attorney. She didn't sound surprised. "I warned your father," she said quietly, "but he believed Frank would protect the firm if anything happened." I laughed bitterly. Guess we both had faith in the wrong people. I sat on it for 2 days. 2 whole days of pretending, smiling, nodding through meetings while I drafted a plan. Because you don't confront a man like Frank without a net. You don't throw a punch unless you know it's going to land. When I finally walked into the boardroom, I brought copies, emails, bank records, a full paper trail. He was seated at the head of the table, Dad's old seat, talking like he'd already won the next 5 quarters. When I walked in, I said, "We need to talk. Now." He paused. "Can it wait until?" "No," I said. "It really can't." And I started laying it all out. Every line item, every shady transfer, every lie dressed up as legacy. The room went quiet, like air had been sucked out of it. Frank tried to laugh. "She doesn't understand what she's reading." I met his gaze. "I do now," and I turned to our lead attorney, seated to my right. "Do you?" He nodded grimly. "That's embezzlement." Frank stood, palms flat on the table. "Your father trusted me, and he'd be ashamed of you." I cut in. "He gave you this company." "No," I said, voice rising. "He built this company, and you tried to take it the second he couldn't fight back." Everyone stared. He opened his mouth, but he didn't have anything left to say. I fired him that afternoon, filed the charges the next morning. He left quietly, but the storm didn't. It lingered, because even with him gone, the damage was real. Projects stalled, clients pulled back, investors started to murmur about leadership instability. And me? I was still pretending I knew what the hell I was doing. One night, I went back to Dad's office. It still smelled like him, that faint mix of aftershave and old carpet. I pulled out the drawer he always locked, the one even I hadn't touched. Inside, I found notebooks, dozens. He'd been journaling everything, deal structures, private worries, his thoughts on every single employee, including Frank. One page read, "I'm worried about Frank. Too many shortcuts lately, watching him closely." I closed the notebook and sat in his chair. Tears came, but they weren't from grief. They were from clarity. He hadn't doubted me. He just knew I had to walk through fire to see what he saw. Now I had, and it was time to rise from it. The morning Frank left, the air in the office changed. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no marching out with boxes. Just a hush, like the building itself had exhaled. But behind the quiet, there was damage. Half the staff didn't know where the big deal stood. Client confidence was shaken. Some of our longest-standing partners were sending emails that read like farewell notes. The company my father built was held together with duct tape and good intentions, and I was standing in the center, holding both ends. That night, I went home and stared at the ceiling for hours. The thought repeated like a pulse. "You're not him. You'll never be him." But another voice started rising. "That's not the point. Because I wasn't supposed to be him. I was supposed to be me, and I had to figure out what my version of leadership looked like." So I made a decision. I walked in the next morning and called an all-hands meeting. People filed in, confused, cautious. A few whispered. A few avoided my eyes. I stood in front of the team, palms flat on the conference table, and I told them the truth, that Frank had manipulated our finances, that the company was in transition, but most importantly, that I wasn't going anywhere. "I'm not here to pretend I have all the answers," I said, "but I know how to find them, and I know how to rebuild. With your help, and with honesty." The room stayed still, then someone clapped, then another, and slowly, something shifted. We started rebuilding in small ways. I brought in a forensic accountant to make sure our books were clean. We streamlined our deals. We cut one of the underperforming satellite offices and reallocated resources to the core markets Dad always believed in. But more than that, I started listening. I sat with every single employee, one-on-one, asked what they loved, what they hated, what they needed, and people talked. They said things they'd been afraid to say for years. They said Frank had shut them down, ignored red flags, padded his numbers. They said Dad had been slipping in those last months, and no one wanted to push him. They said they'd wanted change, but didn't believe it could happen. Now, they were willing to try. 2 months in, I made a bold move. We rebranded. Not a total overhaul, because I still believed in Evergreen, but we shifted the logo, updated our story. We leaned into what we'd always been, personal, grounded, trustworthy. Only now, it came from a woman who'd walked through fire. Prove it. The first big deal we landed post-Frank was a mid-size urban development contract. I pitched it myself. The investor, older, skeptical. I smiled, because I've already handled worse.
He nodded, and he signed.
There were still bad days when I doubted everything, when deals fell apart, or I saw my father's handwriting in a margin and suddenly couldn't breathe. There were days when I resented him for leaving, for trusting the wrong people, for not preparing me. But then I'd find one of his notes, a doodle, a line about good bones in bad buildings, a reminder that legacies aren't born polished, they're made in the mess. 3 months after Frank's exit, I stood in front of a city council hearing, Lakehurst zoning back on the docket. The room was packed, developers, lobbyists, skeptical residents. I stood there in a blazer that didn't quite fit right, heart pounding, hands cold, but I spoke, not with my father's voice, with mine. I talked about housing, about legacy, about trust, and when I finished, the room clapped. We got the permit, and I walked out knowing, for the first time, I wasn't pretending. I was the CEO. The team started to change too. We hired new junior agents, hungry, creative, diverse. We introduced mentorship programs. We got press. But what made me proudest was the culture. People stayed late because they wanted to. People took ownership of projects, not because they were afraid, but because they believed. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. One night, I went back to Dad's office. It was still mine now, but I hadn't changed much. His chair, his desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out his old notepad. On the last page, there was a scribble, a date, a reminder. Talk to Sarah, make her partner, she's ready. It was dated 3 weeks before he died. I sat there for a long time, staring at that line. He knew, he just ran out of time, but somehow, he gave me mine. It's been over a year now. Evergreen is leaner, smarter, stronger. We're building again, literally and metaphorically. The city trusts us, our clients come back. And me? I sleep, not always well, but deeply, because I know who I am now. I'm not my father, but I'm my father's daughter. And this company, it's not a shadow anymore. It's a reflection of where we started and where we're going. If you're ever handed something you didn't ask for, grief, legacy, a title that feels too big, I want you to remember this. You don't have to be them. You just have to be you, and you have to show up every day, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared, because maybe the real inheritance isn't the business. It's the belief that you can take what someone else built and build something even